In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about some ways that you can kind of try to avoid identity theft, and then also sort of the response to identity theft. So this is definitely an example in which the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, in that you're basically putting in some effort to try to make it harder for somebody to steal your identity. It does not mean that that you're going to be completely shielded from somebody stealing your identity, but it does sort of diminish the chances to a certain extent. And the more cautious you are in some ways, the more you're kind of a little bit careful with how you can structure things to try to make it more difficult or try to avoid identity theft. Probably the less severe an identity theft incident would be, and it hopefully would make it a little bit easier from the response side of things, if or at this day and age when it occurs. So let's just kind of work through some of those different kinds of things. First off, beware of document disposal and what you do with that. So if you have old tax forms, things like that, that have social security numbers and income information, all that, first off, note that for it's important practice to actually keep things like tax documents for quite a number of years. And so as a general rule, you should be very reluctant to throw those out for quite some time. And you can consult with your local tax professional about how long you should keep them. But if you had extra copies of it or anything like that, you probably don't want to just dump them in the garbage, because somebody could get them, and then they've got your social security numbers because they're typically on tax forms, and things like that. So they have address, social security number, all those kinds of details. So be careful about that. Any kind of financial statements about your investment accounts, things like that that might have an account number on it. It's just not a great idea to just dump that kind of stuff in the garbage. Shredder would be your friend, or if you have a fireplace or something like that where you could safely burn some paper, and you could burn it, things like that. Basically, just make sure that it's not you're just dumping a whole bunch of things with personally identifiable information in the garbage, that it could make it easier for somebody to actually steal your identity. So just kind of be thoughtful about that. Also, sometimes different places like doctors' offices or businesses, they might ask you for your social security number. Very few of them really actually need it. So try to avoid providing that to doctors' offices, businesses, et cetera, because every time you provide it to some doctor's office or business or what have you, it's now in another company's database, which is another company that if they have a data breach, your information just got stolen. So the fewer places that it's out there, basically fewer places for your data to be stolen from. And good chance that if it's just a doctor's office, honestly, in many cases, don't even need it. So sometimes you can ask, say, hey, why do you need this? And if the person is just kind of pushing on it but doesn't really give you a clear answer for why it's really actually necessary, then from that standpoint, you can ask to speak with the manager or supervisor and say, like, why do you need this? Why do you need the social security number? And by and large, for the most part, the entities that are primarily going to need a social security number would be entities that are going to involve some kind of tax filing information. And so like an employer or something like that, possibly a government entity if they are verifying your identity or something like that, maybe. But the big one is really for tax purposes for the most part. So your employer is going to have it because they're going to have to pay Social Security taxes on your wages. So they're going to have it. If you're dealing with a financial institution and it's a taxable account or something like that, then they're generally going to have it because that is potentially creating a tax aspect of things. If it's an account where some kind of account that could trigger some kind of tax purposes, something like that, then oftentimes it's going to be necessary for them. But once you start getting beyond that, generally speaking, most of the time entities don't really need it. So from that perspective, try to just not provide it. And one of the easy ways to that is just for a lot of those other places, if you go to you go to the dentist, they have a number on there, spot for your social security number, just leave it blank. And most of the time, they don't even really raise an issue about it. So just kind of try to avoid providing it to the extent possible. Also, beware of various digital and electronic risks. So email attachments, phishing emails, electronic devices, wireless networks, email accounts, RFID equipped cards, all kinds of things that have various digital and electronic risks. So let's talk about those a little bit in turn. So email attachments. There are multiple ways in which email attachments could be an issue. So first off, one, if you receive an email attachment from somebody, don't just be quick to open it. It could be malware that's going to then open up and basically start, locking down your computer, stealing information, et cetera. So that's something to be wary of. So one of the thoughts to kind of think about is, so I received an email from somebody, they have an attachment. Is this somebody that is likely to send me an attachment? Do they send me attachments typically? Why are they sending me attachments? Is this an attachment I'm expecting? And if you have any question at all, an easy solution is just to actually reach out to the person. Maybe it's a coworker or something. Say, hey, did you intend to send me attachment? And if it's not a situation where they typically send you attachments, that's a fair question to ask. Now, if it's an attachment you're expecting, well, that's kind of a different story, right? But if you just get an attachment out of nowhere, it's like, that's kind of odd. They don't normally do that. Why are they sending me an attachment? What's going on with that? And basically, just be a little bit more suspicious and just verify. Just shoot off a quick email like, hey, did you mean to send me this? Before you open it, right? So do that before you start opening stuff. And that brings up the topic of phishing emails. So if you get an email that pretends to be from your bank, your financial institution, a coworker, and it says, hey, click here to sign in, or claims to be from IT, hey, click here to verify your password, or hey, we've detected fraudulent activity in your bank, click here to resolve it. There's a really high probability that those things are fraudulent. And basically what they're doing is they're phishing for information. They're trying to get you to click on something or go somewhere and then start entering in information. And they're kind of playing off of emotion here. And basically the idea is they're going to send you something that's going to make you panic, and basically say, oh, we've discovered something bad with your account. And then in your panic of, whoa, what did they find? Then you don't really think clearly. And then you start clicking on links and you start typing in information into forums, and then they're just stealing all those pieces of information, and it's bad. So you want to be very wary of that. So even if you have a financial institution that you work with, and there's an email that purports to be from the financial institution, my standard recommendation is basically don't click on any links in that kind of email, period, basically. That's my normal response to that, is just don't. And if it looks like something's going on and you're like, ooh, that might be something going on, don't click on any links in the email. Go to the source. Go to the financial website or whatever that you normally work with, or call them using a number that you already have. Don't call a number that's in the fishy email. Okay, kind of a double use of fishy there. But anyway, so don't use that number. But you should have somewhere in your records a number that you know to be good for that financial entity, bank, financial institution, whatever, and basically call them and say, hey, I got an email. It's claiming that something is going on. Is it actually going on? What's the situation here? And that's a much better approach. And this is, as a little side note to that, kind of similar, this isn't quite in the digital or electronic risks category. But if you get a phone call that claims to be from, say, your bank, your investment company, or where you have your investments, things like that, anything like that, if they're claiming to be there, they can spoof caller ID in many cases. There have been some attempts to try to make that harder, but at least more recently, pretty good chance that somebody could spoof a caller ID. And so what that means is, just because it shows up on your phone as the person is calling from, say, Bank A, right? Well, that doesn't necessarily mean they're actually calling from Bank A. They could be a scammer that has made it look like that on your caller ID. So my normal response to that would be, if you get a phone call and they're claiming to be from the bank and they're saying, oh, there's something going on, we just want to check, or they're claiming to be from your credit card or something like that, and saying, hey, this is what's going on. Well, if that's the case, again, I would not provide them with any information. What you could do is say, hey, okay, what department are you in? And maybe say they're in the fraud department. Okay, that's fine. And then you tell them, all right, I'm gonna hang up and I'm gonna call back the I'm called back with the main corporate number, and I will ask to be transferred to that department. And you can say I'm aware of the risks of phishing phone calls and identity theft. And if the person is competent at all and also not engaged in phishing, then they shouldn't have any problem with that. Now, if they start pushing really hard, no, it's just be a couple minutes, just a couple minutes. This could be really important. If you hang up, more money, you could lose more money or whatever. If they're creating this sense of urgency, that should be, all kinds of alarm bells that this isn't quite right, because they shouldn't have any problem with you calling back if this is a legitimate situation. So in the case of like a credit card scenario, if you got a phone call claiming to be from your credit card provider, and then basically just like, all right, no thanks, I'm gonna call back, hang up, dig out your card. The card almost always has a contact phone number on the card. So pull out the card, call that number, and say, hey, can I talk to like the fraud department, fraud investigation department? I just got a phone call saying that they were concerned about something, and I'm just trying to follow up on that. Like, is there anything that's actually going on? Was that really a thing or not? And that way you are initiating and you know who you called and you know that you're calling the right people. So as a general principle, pretty much just don't give up any information of any kind of personal sensitive nature, any account information, anything like that on a phone call that you did not initiate. Anyway, and so the same thing kind of goes back with like phishing emails. You just if it's an email that just arrived out of nowhere, you didn't initiate it, things like that. Be very very wary of that, and just don't click links in it, or don't hit reply to it. Make sure you look up an email address you know is good. You create an email that you know is fine, and work through that. Don't fall for the fake emails. Uh, Electronic devices. So if you have stored, say, tax documents on your computer, or you've accessed them on your phone, or you've had logins saved in your computer, or any number of things like that, your browsing history on your phone or computer or other electronic device, your tablet, whatever. It's quite possible that some elements of that information are still floating around on that device on the hard drive. Even if you do try to delete the files, not every device will really securely delete the files. The files may be deleted in the sense that the computer or electronic device now sees that as available space, but it may not necessarily be actually removed at the fundamental hardware level. And so there have been situations where people have thrown out electronic devices, and other people have partially to kind of prove that it's possible, gotten some of these devices and look back at the old hard drives, and they've been able to recreate tax documents, love letters, account statements, you name it, all kinds of stuff. So pretty much make sure that any electronic devices are thoroughly and completely wiped clean, not just deleted, but like completely wiped clean to the point that nobody could recover anything from it ever, even if they did whatever they wanted to it. Before you start throwing that out. And of course, that also means that if somebody steals one of your electronic devices, they need to be thinking about what information was on that device, because it's possible they could circumvent whatever password was on there to possibly get to it, depending on what kind of security settings you had, and whether your hard drive is encrypted or so on and so forth. So something to think about with that. Also, wireless networks. So for wireless networks, if it is not a network that you know and thoroughly trust, you should be very reluctant to enter any kind of personal information into websites on it, because it's possible for people to create malicious wireless networks that basically snoop and gather any information that is entered by somebody through the network. And they've caught people who have done this, where they've gone to like an airport and they basically they spoofed a little Wi-Fi network, and you think you're connecting to the Wi-Fi network of like the airport while you're sitting there waiting for your flight. What you're actually connecting to is the guy a few seats down who's running a little spoof network over there. And if you go start logging into financial websites and things like that, he could be stealing passwords and all kinds of information there. So there's the possibility that they could be getting all kinds of information that you wouldn't be wanting to reveal to somebody. So ultimately, that kind of translates to is be careful about what networks you're connected to when you start entering in that kind of information. So be kind of thoughtful. If you're just connecting to Bob's Wi-Fi, it's like probably not a great time to be logging into your financial accounts there. So be thoughtful about that. Email accounts. Email accounts are often the more of a gatekeeper than you might think. In the sense that oftentimes the email account is where password reset things are sent So if and often in this current age, typically you can have two-factor authentication, things like that. But if you mess up your passwords and you do something goofy, you need to reset your password. Oftentimes, it winds up being linked to an email that's sent to the email address on file, which means that if somebody gains access to your email, first off, they're probably going to see some emails from the different financial institutions and things that you work with, which means they would know what financial institutions, which means they could also then do something like try to trigger a password reset. And that information may, in some cases, be sent to the email address which they've already compromised. So, obviously that's kind of a bad thing. Um, if the more you have like two-factor authentication, the more that should help. Then it would make it more difficult for somebody to do that just by getting access to email. But there's something to be wary of that email accounts are actually more of a gatekeeper than people sometimes realize. So make sure that you keep those secure and have good passwords for that and everything else. Also, some credit cards or debit cards are RFID equipped, so they're wireless. And the downside of that is somebody might actually be able to wirelessly steal the number. So you could have the card in your possession, and people have shown that it's possible. Various hackers and things have shown it's possible to steal credit card kinds of numbers from a longer distance than you would have perhaps thought. In many cases, you would have thought, they have to be within 6 inches or something. But in some cases, it looks like they've actually managed to steal it from a fair amount larger than that. And so somebody might actually be able to steal information from RFID equipped cards and wireless equipped cards and things like that. So that's kind of an important little note there. So as a result of some of these different digital electronic risks, risks of the email and for your different financial accounts, one of the recommendations for that is to use sophisticated passwords and not the same password for everything. And also to make sure you have good security questions and so forth. And one way to kind of start creating some sophisticated passwords, I've seen multiple different kind of approaches to this. There are password managers out there where you can have it generate a whole bunch of passwords, where you have just a password to the password manager. That always does sort of raise the question of, well, what if that gets compromised in some capacity? And so, there's some concerns there, but that's a possible solution where you could have some very large, sophisticated passwords. You don't have to remember them all because the password manager remembers them for you. So, there may be some trade-offs there. Sometimes people have done things like, they use something to help them remember what the password is. So, for instance, an example I've used before is if you use Shakespeare. The famous line, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? You could use that to trigger, maybe some variation of, Romeo, Romeo, like RRW, wherefore, and then four is the number, art thou Romeo, and then you throw in the question mark, and now you've got, like RRW4A, T question mark, or I think I left out an R. But anyway, so I mean, you could do things like that where something that you would remember that then you could sort of how you turn it back into a password basically. So I mean, you could do something like that to create more sophisticated passwords, or maybe a random string of unrelated gibberish words that it like doesn't really make any sense, but you'd remember it. Things like tambourine and I don't know, pickleball. I don't know what else. Throw a whole bunch of other random things in there. So like your password is like tambourine, pickleball, crabgrass or something. And it's just like kind of really random, and somebody wouldn't really probably be picking it. There are thousands of possible words in the English language, and that's there's like no connection between those words. And so I mean, you could do random stuff like that. That it would be highly unlikely that somebody would guess that combination, and we start getting a pretty long password at that point too. So I mean, you could do interesting things like that to help you remember some of the different passwords. It's also worth noting with security questions. Sometimes there's sort of a social engineering aspect that can go on where people look at somebody's social media, and then they can kind of figure out what the answers to the security questions would be. Because if you think about the kinds of things they typically ask, mother's maiden name, well, they might be able to get that off of social media. And then, street you grew up on. Well, you might have posted some throwback pictures from the street you grew up on, like your first dog. And then you look at it like, well, sure enough, you posted a picture of you with, Fluffy back in the day, something like that. So, though the one of the problems with some of those security questions is sometimes people have posted stuff on social media that includes like that kind of information. But that brings up an interesting point. Really, the way the security questions work is they aren't checking the question against what has actually been true. The website is checking the question against the answer you specify. So what that means is you can make up your own weird answers to security questions as long as you can remember what the weird answers are. So in other words, maybe for a security question that asks about the street you grew up on, I don't know, you put in there your favorite food or favorite holiday or something like that and whatever. So, basically if you have sort of a pattern for what answers go with what questions, and you just make up stuff and you're like, yeah, no, I always use this as the answer for a question about street I grew up on, then the advantage there would be that's certainly not something that somebody else is going to guess. And as long as it's something you can remember, then that kind of approach can work. So that's kind of something to think about. All right, so those are some things to do to try to avoid identity theft. Unfortunately, in this day and age, it's quite possible that some aspect of your identity is going to be compromised or stolen. So what do you do if that happens? So there are some signs of identity theft. So if you start getting unknown bills, so statements for loans you didn't take out, things like that, that's kind of going to be an issue. It might be a red flag that something's going on there. You start getting debt collector phone calls for debts you have no idea what they are, and it sounds like they're actually asking for you. Now, it could just be a phishing phone call, so that's possible, but it's also possible that somebody's taken out a loan in your name. And then that's where you can check your credit report and kind of see what loans are out in my name here, and let's kind of look at this. But if you get a phone call like that, don't just start sharing information because basically they might just be trying to get you to give them information. It could be a phishing phone call, so be careful about that. You get a notification there are multiple tax returns that were filed. Okay, somebody stole my identity and has done that. Or you could possibly get a legitimate notification of a data breach. Now, the reason I have legitimate in there, somebody could kind of fish for information on that too, and try to convince you there's a data breach. But oftentimes, in my experience, what happens in many cases is there's some business that I've done some kind of business with, maybe a store or retail outlet of some form that I've done business with, and then sometime later in rolls a piece of mail saying, well, we're required by law to notify you there's been a data breach, and there's a possibility your identity was, some elements of your identifying information were stolen, and we're obligated to provide you with a certain amount of identity protection and so forth. And so you could get a legitimate notification there, and obviously pay attention to that, because if it's a place you've never done business with, and it's like, where's that coming from? So that would be something to be kind of wary of a little bit. But if it's somebody you've been doing business with before or have reason to believe you've done business with, then that's kind of a concern there. And so then you like, okay, now I got to move into how do I address this situation kind of mode. What do I do? So in that case, pretty much you want to take immediate action if there's any kind of identity theft that's gone on. So this is where you can start doing things like credit freezes and fraud alerts with those credit bureaus. So Experian, TransUnion, Equifax, contact them. Let's put maybe a credit freeze on there. If you've got enough evidence of an actual fraud event, we could maybe do a fraud alert. Contact credit providers. So think credit card companies, mortgage lenders, car loan providers, basically anybody who lent you money and say, hey, somebody stole my identity, just to, kind of let you know. If it looks like they compromised your credit card numbers, contact credit card companies, say, hey, I need to get these numbers, basically canceled and transferred into new cards because somebody's compromised this. We need to notify them and deal with that. Contact the FTC and kind of notify them that this has gone on. Contact any relevant agency that would be involved in the situation, and then ultimately file a police report. Sometimes filing the police report kind of gets you a little bit of a foot in the door for a little bit more clout when you start working with credit agencies about fraudulent things in your credit report. Or working with other loan companies to say, when they're trying to claim that you should be paying them, you're like, no. I filed a police report on this. This was fraud, and so forth. Because when you're filing a police report, you're basically testifying essentially under penalty of perjury that what you're saying is correct. So when you have that police report, it kind of ups the ante a little bit of, like I'm actually saying under penalty of perjury, I didn't take out this loan. And basically, so it might buy you a little bit more a little bit more of an appropriate response there when you're trying to deal with the mess. And ultimately, it's going to be a mess and it's going to be painful and it's going to take a lot of time. And basically, it's you just have to go through working with all the different entities and try to address it. Unfortunately, although you file a police report, don't expect the police to do a whole lot about it. And the reason for that is not because they don't want to. The reason for that is realistically, police departments are facing limited resources. And really, if you think about a typical police department, they're going to be a lot more focused on things that involve actual harm. So in other words, in like physical harm, so think murders, rapes, assaults, you know, or breaking and entering with somebody, somebody's at risk, and things like that, where they're going to be a lot more focused on those kinds of crimes typically, just realistically speaking, and that makes sense because people in many cases were physically in danger. So they may well be interested in knowing your identity was stolen, and they may even open a file on it and everything else. But they also may not have a lot of time to devote to it. And it's quite possible whoever stole your identity could be 5 states away, which complicates things from a jurisdiction standpoint, or they could be in a completely different country, in which case the police department can do pretty much nothing anyway. So, there's a real possibility that the police department just wouldn't be able to do a whole lot. But having that police report on file might help you with cleaning up the mess with creditors and credit bureaus. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this discussion of identity theft avoidance and kind of the response has been helpful. Have a great day, and again, thanks for watching.